Hi, my beautiful family. Welcome back to Life-Changing True Stories. Today I bring you a heartfelt and powerful story that reminds us that destiny often hides behind unexpected moments, and sometimes one single night can alter the entire course of our lives forever. The night was silvered by soft city lights, their reflections trembling on the wet pavement after a late evening drizzle. Inside the Crystal Horizon Hotel, a charity gala shimmered with gold, laughter, and the clinking of glasses. The scent of perfume mingled with champagne as guests floated from table to table, their smiles polished, their words rehearsed. Among them stood Isabella Grace, 24 years old, dressed in a plain navy dress that she had borrowed from her friend for the night. She was not used to such luxury, and every chandelier above her seemed to whisper that she didn't belong. But she had come here representing the small architecture firm she worked for, stepping in when her manager fell ill. Her heart raced as she balanced a tray of brochures and nervously scanned the crowd, hoping no one would notice the trembling of her hands. She was used to early mornings, sketching small building drafts and surviving on instant coffee in a tiny studio apartment, not rubbing shoulders with CEOs and billionaires. But sometimes life pushes us into strange rooms because destiny is waiting somewhere inside them. While turning away from a loud cluster of investors, Isabella accidentally collided with someone, so firmly that the sound of breaking glass echoed faintly. A cascade of golden wine splashed down a black-tailored suit. Her stomach twisted in horror. She looked up, eyes wide, and froze. The man towering before her had dark hair that caught the light, piercing steel blue eyes that seemed to see through everything, and the kind of calm confidence only power could give. He was Nathan Steele, the young billionaire whose name adorned the skyline itself. Steele Enterprises, the company behind half the city's grandest towers. "I'm so sorry," Isabella gasped, fumbling for napkins. "I didn't see you, I swear, I was just—" He raised a hand, stopping her frantic apologies with a small smile. "It's fine," he said, his tone smooth like velvet. "It's just a suit. I've got plenty of those. Are you all right?" His kindness disarmed her. She had expected annoyance or arrogance, but instead found warmth in his gaze. Something genuine that didn't fit the polished billionaire image everyone whispered about. "I'm fine," she murmured, cheeks flaming. "But your suit—" Nathan chuckled softly. "Let's call it an artistic design. Maybe it needed a little color." That single laugh changed something in the air. They both smiled, and in that tiny moment the chaos around them seemed to melt away. The evening continued, and somehow Nathan kept finding her again and again. He asked what she did, listened intently when she described her passion for design, and told her about his latest architectural projects with an unexpected enthusiasm that surprised her. For once, he wasn't the billionaire talking about profits or power. He was just a man who loved creating beauty from steel and glass. Hours passed like minutes. The gala ended and guests began drifting out into the night. Nathan hesitated, watching her collect her things. "I know this might sound strange," he said slowly, "but would you like to see something beautiful? My penthouse has the best view in the city." Isabella's breath caught. Every sensible thought warned her not to go. He was a stranger, a man from a world she didn't belong to, but something in his voice carried sincerity, not the arrogance she feared. Against every piece of logic, she found herself nodding. They walked together through the quiet streets, the rain now only a memory in the air. His car, a sleek black masterpiece, waited under the hotel awning. The drive was silent at first, but not uncomfortable. The city lights glided past like glowing memories, and the air between them was charged with something delicate yet undeniable. When they arrived, Isabella stood speechless before the massive glass doors that opened into Nathan's penthouse. The city lay below them like a field of stars, stretching endlessly into the horizon. "It's beautiful," she whispered, stepping closer to the window. Nathan joined her, his voice soft. "When I built this place, I thought it would make me feel on top of the world. But most nights it just feels empty." That confession surprised her. "How can someone like you ever feel empty?" she asked, her tone gentle. He smiled faintly, the kind of smile that hides years of loneliness. "Because success doesn't fill silence," he said quietly. "It just makes it echo louder." Isabella turned to look at him, and for the first time, she saw the man beyond the money, the boy who once had dreams, who worked too hard, who probably lost himself along the way. They spoke for hours about life, dreams, regrets, and the quiet ache of never feeling enough. Somewhere in that conversation, laughter turned to stillness, stillness to closeness, and closeness to something deeper. When Nathan reached out to tuck a strand of hair behind her ear, she didn't pull away. The kiss began softly, hesitant, filled with unspoken questions. But when their lips met, every wall crumbled. The city lights outside blurred into streaks of silver as they surrendered to the rare kind of connection that happens only once in a lifetime. For that one night, they weren't billionaire and assistant. They were just two lost souls who finally found warmth in each other's arms. When morning light filtered through the glass walls, Isabella stirred. The scent of him lingered on the pillow beside her, and the room felt strangely empty. She sat up, confusion slowly turning to dread. Nathan's side of the bed was cold. She called his name once, twice, but only silence answered. Panic rising, she slipped on her dress and searched the penthouse. Every room was spotless, impersonal, and empty. The balcony door stood slightly open, letting in the breeze, but Nathan was gone. No note, no message, nothing but the faint aroma of his cologne and the echo of the night they shared. Her heart clenched painfully. Maybe she had been a fool. Maybe he was just another man who took what he wanted and left before dawn. She returned to her small apartment that morning, exhausted and hollow. She replayed every word, every laugh, every look. It had felt real, so real, but maybe that was the cruelest illusion of all. Days passed, then weeks. She tried to bury the memory of him beneath work, deadlines, and exhaustion, but destiny had not finished its design. One evening, as she sat sketching at her kitchen table, nausea struck suddenly. It wasn't just one day, it happened again the next morning and the one after that. She brushed it off as stress until she realized her period was late, very late. Her heart began pounding in her chest. She bought a pregnancy test on her way home, then another and another, just to be sure. The next morning, under the pale bathroom light, she stared at the test strip as two clear lines appeared. Her knees gave out and she sank to the floor, covering her mouth as tears filled her eyes. She was pregnant. Pregnant with Nathan Steele's child, the man who had disappeared without a trace. Fear and disbelief crashed over her. How could this happen? How could she, a simple woman with barely enough to survive, raise a child alone? Her hands trembled as she whispered into the silence, "What am I going to do?" But in the middle of her panic, something shifted inside her. She placed her hand gently over her stomach, feeling the fragile spark of life growing there, and for the first time in days she felt calm. This child was innocent, pure, a miracle born from one night that had changed everything. Maybe Nathan had walked away, but she would not. She would stay. She would fight. She would give this baby every ounce of love she had. That night, as the city slept, Isabella sat by the window watching the lights shimmer far below. The tears had stopped. Her fear had turned into quiet determination. Life had taken her somewhere unexpected, but she would not crumble. She whispered softly, almost like a vow, "You and me, little one. We'll be all right." Outside, the wind carried the distant hum of the world that would soon test her strength. She didn't know then that 5 years later, fate would bring Nathan Steele back into her life, not as a stranger but as her new boss, and the father of the child she had raised alone, and that is where the real story would begin. 5 years had passed since that unforgettable night. 5 years since the moment Isabella Grace's life had been rewritten forever. Time had moved like a quiet river, slow, unpredictable, sometimes gentle, sometimes fierce, but it had carried her and her child forward. The tiny apartment she once shared with fear and uncertainty had transformed into a warm little world filled with laughter, paint stains, bedtime stories, and a small boy whose smile could melt every sadness away. His name was Ethan. He had dark hair like hers and piercing steel blue eyes that mirrored the man he would never know. Every time Isabella looked into those eyes, she felt both pain and peace. Pain for the love that vanished and peace for the blessing it left behind. Ethan was her world, her purpose, the proof that even a broken beginning can blossom into something extraordinary. Life had not been easy, but Isabella had become stronger than she ever imagined. She had learned to stretch every dollar, to live with discipline and gratitude, to work late nights while Ethan slept peacefully beside her drawings and notes. She had taken online design courses, earned new certifications, and slowly built a reputation for her creativity. Her sketches, once small and hesitant, now carried grace and confidence. The young assistant who once spilled champagne at a billionaire's gala had evolved into a talented architectural designer, ready to step into a brighter chapter. When a prestigious architecture firm called Steel Development Group announced new openings for senior project designers, Isabella hesitated. The name made her pulse quicken. It was impossible not to remember. Could it be the same Steel? No, she told herself, it couldn't be. Steel was a common enough name, and besides, her Nathan had disappeared long ago. Still, as she prepared her portfolio, her hands trembled just a little. She reminded herself that she was not the same girl anymore. She was a mother, a fighter, a professional. Whatever ghosts lingered in her past, she had built something solid in the present. On the morning of her interview, Isabella wore her best navy suit and tied her hair neatly, hiding the nervous flutter beneath a calm smile. Ethan, now 4, hugged her tightly before she left for her mother's apartment. "Good luck, Mommy," he said in his small, confident voice. "You're gonna win." His words, pure and innocent, filled her with courage. The elevator to the top floor of Steel Development opened into a gleaming lobby of glass and marble. Everything about the place spoke of elegance and success, the kind of world Isabella had once only glimpsed from afar. The receptionist guided her toward a conference room, and she sat waiting, hands clasped, heart thudding like a drum. Then the door opened, and time stopped. Nathan Steele walked in. For a moment, the world tilted. Isabella's breath froze in her chest. He looked almost exactly the same, perhaps older, sharper, but still devastatingly composed. His dark hair was shorter, his jawline more defined, his tailored suit exuding quiet power. But his eyes, those familiar steel blue eyes, were what made her knees weaken. The eyes she had seen every day in her son. He didn't notice her at first. He was scanning his tablet, discussing something with his assistant, his tone calm and precise. Then when his gaze lifted to meet hers, the room seemed to still. His expression flickered. Confusion, recognition, disbelief, all within a heartbeat. "Miss Grace," he said finally, his voice even but softer than before. "Please have a seat." She was already seated, yet she nodded, forcing composure. "Thank you, Mr. Steele." For the next 20 minutes, they discussed her experience, her design projects, her goals. Or at least they pretended to. Beneath every word lingered 1,000 unsaid things. His tone remained professional, but his eyes betrayed something restless. When the interview ended, he stood, extending his hand just as he had 5 years ago. "It's good to see someone passionate about design," he said quietly. "You'll hear from us soon." Their hands touched, just for a second, and Isabella felt the same electric current that once tied them together. But this time she pulled away quickly, offering a polite smile before gathering her papers. As she left the office, her heart raced. She didn't look back, but she could feel his eyes following her until the door closed. That night, as she tucked Ethan into bed, her thoughts were tangled. Why had fate done this? After all these years, after she had built a life without him, why now? She brushed Ethan's hair softly, watching the boy sleep peacefully, his tiny hand curled near his face. "You'll never know," she whispered. "You'll never know who he is." But even as she said it, her heart trembled, because deep down she knew secrets have their own way of surfacing. 2 days later, Isabella received a call. She had been offered the job. Her first reaction was joy. This was the opportunity she had been working toward for years, but it was followed immediately by fear. Working under Nathan Steele meant living every day in the shadow of what she had buried. Still, she accepted. Life demanded courage, and she had learned that running away from the past only gives it more power. Her first day at Steel Development was surreal. The office was full of creative energy and ambition. She met her team, was briefed on a major upcoming project, and was assigned directly under the creative director, Nathan himself. Every meeting was a test of endurance. He treated her professionally, his tone measured and distant, but occasionally she caught him watching her with a strange expression, as though trying to solve a mystery he couldn't quite remember. One evening, as the rest of the team left, Nathan approached her desk. "You did good work on the skyline proposal," he said quietly. "Your design concept was impressive." "Thank you," she replied, careful to sound neutral. He hesitated, then asked, "Have we met before? I keep feeling like I know you from somewhere." The question struck deep, but she forced a light laugh. "Maybe you've seen me at another firm. Architecture is a small world." He nodded, though his eyes lingered on her face a moment too long. "Maybe," he murmured, then turned away. When he was gone, Isabella exhaled slowly, gripping the edge of her desk. She could feel the truth pressing at the walls of her heart, begging to be spoken, but she couldn't. Not yet. Ethan was her whole life. She had built their world on silence, on the belief that Nathan didn't need to know. But now he was back, and with every day that passed, that silence grew heavier. Weeks rolled by and their working relationship deepened. Nathan admired her discipline, her creativity, and her ability to stay calm under pressure. Isabella, despite her efforts, found herself drawn again to his quiet strength, the way he spoke about vision and purpose, the rare moments when he smiled without thinking. It was like watching a storm she couldn't look away from. Then one afternoon, fate moved again. The company hosted a family day, a casual event where employees could bring their loved ones to the office rooftop garden for games and food. Isabella tried to avoid it, but Ethan begged to come. "Please, Mommy. I want to see where you work." His enthusiasm was impossible to resist. She finally agreed, dressing him in a neat little blue shirt and jeans, his hair combed to one side. The moment they arrived, Ethan ran excitedly among the crowd, laughing as he tried to catch balloons. Nathan was standing near the fountain speaking to a few executives when the sound of that laugh caught his attention. He turned and froze. There, running through the sunlight, was a boy who looked impossibly familiar. The same eyes, the same hair, even the same tiny dimple that had once belonged to his own childhood smile. For a second, Nathan couldn't breathe. He watched as Ethan tripped slightly, and Isabella rushed over to help him up, brushing his knees gently, her expression full of love and warmth. Nathan's mind raced. The resemblance was undeniable. His heart pounded in his chest as he walked toward them, each step heavy with questions. Isabella looked up, startled, as his shadow fell across them. "This is your son?" he asked quietly, his voice almost breaking. Her lips parted, but no words came out. Ethan looked up curiously. "Hi," he said brightly. "Are you Mommy's boss?" Nathan forced a small smile. "Yes, I am," he replied softly, his gaze never leaving Isabella's. The air between them thickened with unspoken truth. Nathan's eyes searched hers, demanding an answer that she wasn't ready to give. She felt her world tilt again, the same way it had 5 years ago in that glittering ballroom. That night, long after the event ended, Nathan sat alone in his penthouse staring out over the same city lights that once witnessed their first night together. His heart and mind were a battlefield. Could it be? Had he unknowingly left behind not just a woman but a child? The thought was unbearable, yet it explained everything. The way she had avoided his gaze, the quiet sadness in her smile, the uncanny resemblance of that little boy. Meanwhile, in her small apartment, Isabella held Ethan as he slept, tears rolling silently down her face. She had always known this moment would come, that someday the past would find its way home. And now that it had, she didn't know how to protect what she loved most, because once the truth was spoken, nothing would ever be the same again. The night after the company's family event was one that Isabella would never forget. It was the kind of night that stretched endlessly, where the ticking clock on the wall felt louder than her own heartbeat, and every creak of the apartment seemed to echo with the weight of what had happened. She sat near the window, the city lights painting soft reflections on the glass, her arms wrapped around herself as she watched her son sleep peacefully in the small bedroom beside her. Ethan's face, calm and innocent, looked like an untouched world, and yet she knew that his life now stood on the edge of revelation. For 5 years, she had carried this secret alone, believing that silence was the only way to protect him. But fate had caught up with her, just as it always does, and now the truth trembled on the brink of exposure. Nathan Steele had seen Ethan. The recognition in his eyes earlier that afternoon had been unmistakable. It was not the vague curiosity of a man meeting his employee's child. It was a deep, visceral knowing. The same knowing that a soul feels when it stumbles upon a piece of itself it never realized was missing. Isabella had seen it all in the brief frozen moment when he looked from her to the boy. She had seen the questions form behind those gray eyes, questions that she had no words strong enough to answer. Sleep was impossible. Memories of that night 5 years ago came flooding back. The laughter, the quiet balcony conversation, the unexpected tenderness that had turned into something more. She remembered waking alone and broken, believing she had been abandoned, But now, for the first time, doubt began to seep in. What if there had been more to his disappearance than she knew? What if he hadn't left out of indifference, but out of something else she had never been told? Still, those thoughts couldn't erase the reality that she had faced everything alone. Every fear, every sleepless night, every bill, every illness, every tear. And no matter how much Nathan's eyes haunted her now, he hadn't been there when she needed him most. At Steel Development Group, the air changed between them. Nathan became quieter, more observant. His usual composure carried an undercurrent of restlessness. During meetings, he often seemed distracted, his gaze lingering on Isabella longer than necessary, especially when she spoke about her designs or shared her ideas. He didn't ask about Ethan directly, not yet, but she could sense the question burning inside him. It was only a matter of time before it would rise to the surface. Days turned into weeks, and every moment felt like walking through a storm that hadn't yet broken. One evening, as the office emptied and the lights dimmed across the open floor, Nathan approached her desk again, his hands tucked into his pockets, his voice quieter than she had ever heard. "Isabella," he said, his tone almost hesitant, "could I talk to you for a moment?" Her stomach twisted. She knew this moment was coming, but she had no idea what she would say when it did. She followed him into his office, the same one where their paths had unexpectedly collided again after so many years. The city stretched beyond the glass wall, glowing in shades of gold and silver as if it, too, was listening. For a long moment, he didn't speak. He just stood by the window, his reflection merging with the skyline. Finally, he turned toward her and his voice broke the silence. "That boy," he said softly, "Ethan. He looks exactly like I did when I was his age. And he has your smile." He paused, searching her face for confirmation. "Tell me I'm wrong, Isabella. Please tell me that I'm wrong." The words lodged in her throat. She wanted to lie, to protect the fragile life she had built, but her heart betrayed her. Her eyes shimmered with tears, and that was answer enough. Nathan exhaled sharply, running a hand through his hair as he turned away, his body trembling slightly with emotion. The silence that followed was filled with 5 years of everything unspoken. When he finally looked at her again, his voice was raw. "Why didn't you tell me? Why did you let me disappear from his life?" "From your life?" Her tears fell then, unstoppable, years of exhaustion spilling out all at once. "Because you left, Nathan," she said, her voice shaking. "You walked out before the sun even rose. You disappeared without a word, without a number, without a single sign that you ever cared. What was I supposed to do? Chase a man who clearly didn't want to stay? I was nothing to you but a mistake that happened in one night." He stepped closer, shaking his head. "That's not true," he said firmly, his tone laced with pain. "That night wasn't a mistake, Isabella. I woke up early that morning because I had to catch a flight for an emergency in London. One of my companies was on the edge of collapse, and everything depended on me being there. I tried to leave a message at the front desk, but they told me later they couldn't find you. When I came back weeks later, you were gone, your number disconnected, your apartment empty. I searched for you for months, but it was like you'd vanished into thin air." Her heart faltered. The anger that had protected her for so long began to crumble, replaced by confusion and disbelief. Could it really be true? Had all those years of resentment been built on a misunderstanding? She turned away, tears streaming silently, her hands trembling against the edge of his desk. "I didn't know," she whispered. "I thought you left because you wanted to forget." He moved closer, his voice breaking now. "I could never forget you. And now to know that I've missed 5 years of my son's life." His words faded, heavy with regret. "Do you have any idea how that feels?" Isabella closed her eyes, every emotion colliding inside her. Guilt, fear, relief, anger, all of them tangled in one storm. She had raised Ethan alone out of love and strength, but now the man whose absence had defined her life stood before her, shattered by the truth she had hidden. "I was scared," she said softly. "I didn't want to ruin your life. You were building an empire and I was barely surviving. I didn't want you to feel trapped." Nathan's expression softened as he reached out, though he didn't touch her yet. "You think my life was complete without you? Without him? Isabella, everything I built feels meaningless right now. You gave me something I never even knew I wanted. A family." The weight of his words filled the room like a slow sunrise after years of darkness. Isabella finally looked up, meeting his eyes. And for a fleeting moment she saw the same man she had once fallen for. Not the billionaire or the businessman, but the man who once laughed with her under city lights, who had spoken to her like she mattered. But reality was crueler now. Things weren't simple anymore. Love wasn't enough to erase the years apart, the missed birthdays, the first steps, the bedtime stories he had never been there to tell. So she took a slow breath and said, "You may be his father, Nathan, but that doesn't mean you can just walk in and change everything. Ethan doesn't even know you exist. I can't just let you turn his world upside down." Nathan nodded slowly, his jaw tightening. "I understand, but I'm not giving up this time. I lost you once, Isabella. I won't lose both of you again." His voice carried quiet determination, the kind that could move mountains, and for the first time in years, she didn't doubt that he meant it. Over the next few weeks, Nathan kept his distance but didn't disappear. He began small gestures, offering flexible hours for her, helping her with projects, sometimes bringing her coffee without saying much. He didn't force conversations about Ethan, but she could feel his longing every time their eyes met. And one afternoon when he saw Ethan again outside the office, this time running into her arms after daycare, Nathan simply stood there from afar, watching the boy's laughter echo in the sun, his own eyes filled with tears he didn't bother to hide. Isabella saw him too, and something inside her softened. Maybe fate had brought him back not to reopen old wounds, but to heal what had been broken. She didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in years, she wasn't afraid to find out. That night, she tucked Ethan into bed and sat quietly beside him, brushing his hair as he slept. "Someday," she whispered, "you'll understand everything. You'll know how much you were loved. By me, and maybe even by the man who gave you your eyes." Her tears fell silently, but this time, they didn't taste of sorrow. They tasted like release. Across the city, Nathan stood alone on his penthouse balcony, looking out at the same skyline where their story had begun. He held an old photograph in his hand, a copy of a charity gala picture he had found from that night long ago. In it, Isabella was laughing, her face bright with life. He smiled faintly through the ache in his chest. "I'll make it right," he whispered to the night. "For her, for him, for us." And somewhere between the two hearts that had once lost each other, a quiet promise formed, one that would soon test everything they thought they knew about love, forgiveness, and destiny. The weeks that followed the revelation passed in a haze of emotions that neither Isabella nor Nathan fully understood. It was as if life had suddenly turned into a fragile bridge stretched between the past and the present, between pain and forgiveness, between two people who had once shared a night of magic and 5 years of silence. The truth had stripped away the distance that words once maintained, and in its place remained only the raw, trembling reality of what they had lost, and what they might still have the power to restore. Isabella had spent so long keeping her heart guarded, protecting Ethan from a world that could change too easily, that she didn't know how to let anyone in anymore. Nathan, on the other hand, was learning what it meant to feel helpless in the face of something that money and influence could not fix. He had built empires, signed billion-dollar deals, stood at the top of every mountain society valued, but all of it meant nothing when he stood before the small boy who shared his eyes and called another man uncle. Nathan began to show up quietly, not as a tycoon or a boss, but as a man trying to earn a place he had never known he lost. He started by asking Isabella a simple question about Ethan's favorite foods, the cartoons he liked, the books he loved. Isabella answered with careful honesty, unsure if she was ready to let him closer, but unable to ignore the sincerity in his eyes. One evening, when she mentioned that Ethan had been struggling with reading certain words, Nathan smiled and said gently that he'd like to help, if she'd allow it. It was a cautious offer, the kind that carried both hope and fear, and after a long silence, Isabella nodded. That weekend, he came to her apartment for the first time. The place was small but full of warmth, the walls lined with Ethan's drawings and photographs that captured moments of everyday joy. Nathan stood there for a long moment, his chest tightening as he looked around. Not because of the simplicity of the space, but because of the love it radiated. It was a home built from perseverance and sacrifice, and it humbled him in a way that nothing else ever had. When Ethan ran to the door, his little hands clutching his toy spaceship, he greeted Nathan with innocent excitement. "Hi, Mr. Steele," he chirped. "Mommy said you're really good with buildings." Nathan laughed, crouching down to the boy's level. "I try to be," he said warmly. Maybe one day you'll help me build something even better." The way Ethan grinned at him, his eyes wide with curiosity, made something in Nathan's heart shift permanently. He felt the invisible string that connects souls tighten between them, a bond that words hadn't yet acknowledged but both seemed to sense instinctively. They sat together at the kitchen table that afternoon, Ethan's picture book spread out like treasures. Nathan guided him gently through the words, his patience unwavering, his tone soft and encouraging. Isabella watched from the corner of the room, her hands wrapped around a cup of tea, her emotions a tangled thread of awe and uncertainty. The sight of them together felt unreal, like seeing two parts of the same heart finally recognize each other. As weeks turned into months, Nathan became a quiet presence in their lives. He didn't force himself in, nor did he make grand promises. Instead, he showed up, consistently, humbly, humanly. He joined Ethan at the park on Sundays, learned how to assemble toy cars with the same focus he once used to build skyscrapers, and even attended the school's father-child activity day after Isabella reluctantly agreed. Watching him kneel on the grass helping Ethan build a cardboard rocket, Isabella saw something in his face she had never seen before. Not power or pride, but pure joy. It was the joy of a man discovering what love meant beyond achievement. It was redemption taking shape, not through apology but through quiet action. Yet despite the growing comfort between them, Isabella still carried an ache she couldn't voice. She was terrified that letting Nathan too close would one day lead to another loss. She had built her life on self-reliance. She had survived heartbreak and loneliness, and she had promised herself that Ethan would never suffer from the instability that once defined her own heart. So every time Nathan's kindness softened her defenses, she reminded herself of that promise. Still, life has a way of eroding walls when love persists long enough. There were nights when Nathan would drop them home after a late meeting, and as he stood in the doorway saying goodbye, his gaze would linger just a little too long. There were mornings when he brought coffee for Isabella at work, their hands brushing for a moment longer than they should. They both knew that something deeper was rekindling between them, something fragile yet powerful, something neither of them dared to name aloud. One evening, after a particularly long day at the office, Nathan found Isabella sitting on the terrace outside the design department, her sketchbook open beside her. The sky was painted in shades of amber and violet, the air cool with the promise of rain. He joined her quietly, sitting a respectful distance away. For a while, neither spoke. The silence between them was not awkward. It was full of everything they didn't need to say. Finally, Nathan broke it with a voice that trembled just enough to betray his vulnerability. "You know," he said, "for years I thought success was about control. Controlling time, people, outcomes. But ever since I met Ethan, I've realized how wrong I was. There's no controlling love. You either fight for it or you lose it forever." Isabella looked at him, her eyes shining with tears she didn't want to fall. "I fought for it once," she said softly, "and it nearly destroyed me." Nathan turned toward her, his expression raw. "Then let me fight for it now," he whispered. "Let me be the one to fix what I broke." His words sank deep into her soul, but the fear still lingered. Love, she knew, wasn't a switch that could be turned back on after years of silence. It was a fragile thing that needed time to breathe again. Still, for the first time, she didn't turn away. She let the possibility of forgiveness rest between them like a fragile spark waiting to grow. The next few weeks brought change neither of them expected. Nathan began including Isabella in high-level design meetings, trusting her instincts and giving her credit for her ideas. He championed her project proposals and even asked her to co-lead a new urban renewal plan, a massive assignment that could elevate her career beyond anything she had imagined. Colleagues whispered that she was his favorite, but Nathan made sure to keep boundaries clear, respecting her dignity and professionalism. His transformation did not go unnoticed. Even the board members, long used to his ruthless efficiency, began to see a new version of him, calmer, more patient, more human. It was as if Ethan and Isabella had reintroduced him to the person he was meant to be. One weekend, Ethan's school held a small exhibition where parents were invited to see the children's artwork. Nathan came, wearing a simple shirt instead of a suit, his sleeves rolled up, his hair slightly tousled from the wind. When Ethan proudly pointed out his drawing of my family, Nathan felt his throat tighten. On the paper, the little boy had drawn 3 stick figures, a woman with long hair, a small child in the middle. and a tall man standing beside them, holding both their hands. Underneath, in uneven letters, Ethan had written, "Mommy, me, and Mr. Steele." Isabella saw it too, and her eyes filled instantly. It was a simple picture, but to both of them it said everything that words could not. After the exhibition, as they walked outside under the afternoon sun, Nathan stopped and turned to Isabella. His voice was low but steady. "I don't expect forgiveness overnight. I don't even expect love. But I want to be there, every day in whatever way you'll let me, not just as his father, but as the man who's willing to start over, from the beginning." Isabella looked at him for a long moment, searching his face, and what she saw there was not the arrogance of a man who once lived above the clouds, but the humility of someone who had finally learned what truly mattered. She nodded slowly, a faint smile trembling on her lips. "One step at a time, Nathan," she said softly. "That's all I can promise." And one step at a time was how it began. Nathan became a fixture in their lives, not by grand gestures, but by presence, reading bedtime stories, helping with homework, driving them to the park, fixing things around the apartment, sometimes just sitting quietly in the evenings while Isabella painted and Ethan built his toy towers. The rhythm of their small family began to form naturally, like music rediscovered after years of silence. There were still fears and doubts, but there was also laughter again, and in that laughter, there was healing. One rainy evening, as thunder rumbled softly in the distance, Isabella found herself standing on her balcony, watching the lights shimmer through the drizzle. Nathan came to stand beside her, holding a cup of tea for her the way he often did now. They stood side by side, the sound of rain filling the spaces words could never touch. Finally, she turned to him, her eyes reflecting both the city and her own emotions. "You've changed," she said quietly. "You're not the man I met 5 years ago." He smiled faintly, his voice gentle. Maybe losing everything that mattered was what it took to finally see what really does. The rain softened to a whisper, and for the first time in years, Isabella felt no trace of the loneliness that had once haunted her. She didn't know what the future would bring, but she knew one truth now. Redemption wasn't about erasing the past. It was about choosing every single day to love despite it. And Nathan Steele, the man who had once lived for skyscrapers and success, had finally learned that the greatest thing he could ever build was not made of glass or steel. It was made of forgiveness, patience, and family. As they stood there, with the soft rain wrapping the night in silver, the city seemed to glow a little warmer, as if the universe itself was quietly celebrating the return of something it had almost lost. Two hearts learning to beat together again, one promise at a time. Months drifted quietly after the night of rain, and each passing day stitched together the fragile pieces of what once seemed impossible to repair. The rhythm of life inside Isabella's small apartment had changed so naturally that she sometimes forgot what loneliness used to feel like. There were mornings filled with the sound of Ethan's laughter echoing through the kitchen as Nathan flipped pancakes with exaggerated seriousness, pretending to be a chef. There were evenings when they would all sit on the couch, the glow of the television washing over them while Nathan helped Ethan assemble puzzles, his patience infinite and his eyes full of quiet pride. For Isabella, these moments felt like soft sunlight after a long winter, a warmth she had learned to live without but now found herself craving again. Yet deep within her heart, there was still one wall left standing, the one built from the fear that happiness could vanish again just as easily as it had before. Nathan sensed that hesitation even without words. He never pushed, never demanded more than she was ready to give. He knew that love was not a door to be forced open, but a fragile bloom that unfolded only in trust. So he gave her consistency, the thing he once thought he could buy but had now learned only sacrifice could earn. Every time Isabella looked into his eyes, she no longer saw the distant billionaire from that long-ago gala. She saw a man who had rebuilt himself from the inside, one who had traded ego for empathy, power for presence, and loneliness for love. And slowly, her heart began to trust the possibility that maybe second chances were not gifts from fate, but choices made in courage. One Saturday morning, as sunlight poured through the lace curtains, Nathan arrived earlier than usual, carrying a small envelope in his hand. He looked almost nervous, something rare for a man known for his composure. Isabella was making coffee, her hair tied loosely, dressed simply but glowing with the quiet beauty that had always been uniquely hers. Ethan was at the table coloring a picture of rockets and stars. Nathan approached, his voice soft. "Can I steal a few minutes before breakfast?" She turned toward him curiously, nodding. He handed her the envelope without explanation. Inside was a single sheet of paper, an official document with the Steel Development logo at the top. Her brow furrowed as she read the words, "Appointment of Design Director, Isabella Grace." Her eyes lifted in disbelief. "Nathan, what is this?" He smiled gently, his tone humble. "It's what you've earned, Isabella. You've built yourself from nothing, and everyone in the company knows your work speaks louder than any title I could give. You've inspired the entire team, including me. This isn't a favor, and it's recognition long overdue." She blinked rapidly, tears threatening to fall, overwhelmed not by the promotion itself but by the respect behind it. He wasn't giving her a gift. He was giving her dignity. She stepped closer, emotion thick in her voice. "You didn't have to do this." He shook his head. "Yes, I did. Because you've reminded me that success means nothing if it doesn't lift others with it." Ethan looked up from his drawing, smiling brightly as he held it out. "Look, Mommy. I drew us going to space." In his picture, 3 astronauts floated hand in hand surrounded by stars. The innocence of it made Isabella laugh through her tears, and Nathan reached out instinctively, brushing a strand of hair from her face. For a heartbeat, the world stood still. Their eyes met, hers full of gratitude and longing, his full of hope and quiet reverence. In that gaze, there was an unspoken truth neither could deny any longer. They weren't 2 strangers bound by a night of passion or even 2 parents united by chance. They were 2 souls who had survived their own storms and found their way back to the same horizon. As the weeks passed, Isabella's confidence blossomed in her new role. She began leading projects with grace and creativity, and Nathan stood by her side not as a savior but as a partner. The office buzzed with admiration, not just for their professional synergy but for the quiet warmth that seemed to radiate between them. Yet even amid that growing closeness, neither had spoken the words that lingered in every glance. Love had returned, but fear still guarded its gate. Nathan wanted to tell her that he loved her, that he had loved her since the moment she spilled champagne on his suit. But he also knew that love declared too soon might shatter what patience had built. Fate, however, has a way of deciding the perfect moment. One evening, after a long day of presentations, they found themselves walking along the waterfront near the newly finished skyline project they had designed together. The air smelled of salt and rain, and the reflections of skyscrapers shimmered on the dark water like living stars. Ethan had fallen asleep earlier in the car, and Isabella had tucked him in before meeting Nathan there to review the site. The city was quiet, the hum of traffic distant, the night wrapped in silver calm. Nathan turned toward her, his hands in his pockets, his expression thoughtful. "Do you remember the first time we met?" he asked. She smiled faintly. "How could I forget? I ruined your tie and almost your entire evening." He chuckled softly. "It was the best accident of my life." They stood there, the memory between them warm and alive. He looked at her then, and something in his gaze deepened. Not the searching confusion of before, but the steady certainty of a man who had finally come home. "I used to believe love was about finding someone who made life easier," he said quietly. "But now I know it's about finding someone who makes you want to be better, even when it's hard. You and Ethan did that for me." Isabella's eyes glistened, her voice barely a whisper. "You changed too, Nathan. The man I see now isn't the one I met that night. He's better, braver, kinder." He took a slow step closer, his voice trembling slightly. "Then maybe that means I finally deserve to ask the question I should have asked years ago." Her breath caught as he reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. The world seemed to pause around them. The lights, the wind, even the sound of the waves, all holding their breath as Nathan knelt down. "Isabella Grace," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "You were the woman who changed my life the night we met. The woman who carried my heart even when you didn't know it, and the mother of the greatest gift I'll ever have. I don't want to spend another day without being part of your life. Not as your boss, not as your past, but as your future. Will you marry me?" Tears spilled freely down her cheeks, her hands trembling as she covered her mouth. Every memory, every pain, every moment of strength came rushing back like a wave. She looked at him, really looked, and saw not perfection but redemption. The man kneeling before her was no longer the one who had vanished. He was the one who had stayed, fought, and waited. She stepped forward, her voice breaking through her tears. "Yes, Nathan. Yes, I will." He stood, pulling her into his arms as the city lights flared behind them, 1,000 tiny stars witnessing their rebirth. When they told Ethan the next morning, his reaction was pure joy. "Does that mean we're all going to be together forever?" he asked, eyes wide with excitement. Nathan smiled, lifting him into his arms. "Forever and ever," he said. That night, as they all sat together on the balcony, watching the same skyline that had once separated them, Isabella leaned her head against Nathan's shoulder and whispered, "It's strange, isn't it? How life gives you back what you thought you'd lost, but only after you've learned how to cherish it." Nathan kissed the top of her head softly. "Maybe that's what love really is," he murmured. "Not something perfect, but something that survives the breaking." Years later, when their story became one they told Ethan as he grew older, it wasn't the pain they remembered most. It was the grace, the quiet, unstoppable grace that had carried them through every heartbreak to the life they built together. Isabella often said that the greatest miracles don't arrive wrapped in perfection. They come disguised as second chances. And for Nathan, the truth was even simpler. He had spent years designing towers meant to touch the sky, but in the end, the only masterpiece that mattered was the family sitting beside him under its light. On the night of their wedding anniversary, long after guests had gone and laughter had faded into music, Isabella and Nathan stood together on the balcony of their home. Ethan, now taller and full of dreams of his own, slept soundly inside. The moon glowed over the city like a witness to their journey. Nathan held her close, his voice low and steady. 5 years ago I lost you. Then I found you again. If there's one thing I've learned, it's that love isn't measured in how perfectly we begin, but in how bravely we keep going." Isabella smiled through the shimmer of tears, her fingers tightening around his. "And we'll keep going," she whispered, "because forever began the moment we forgave." Below them, the city pulsed with light, the same city that had once watched two strangers collide and had now witnessed their story of loss, redemption, and enduring love. The wind carried the faint sound of laughter, the whisper of promises kept, and the heartbeat of a family that had learned the most beautiful truth of all, that even when life breaks us, forgiveness has the power to build something stronger in its place, something that truly lasts forever.